Howdy, guys. Hey, Jay. Hey, Alma. Hey, Denny. Jeff. What's up? Yo. Hi, Youngs. Hey, I got no Mountain Dew tonight. Hi, Roy Love. I'm in Salt Lake City tonight. Hey, Kim. This is just a Periscope broadcast. So, hey, before we jump into the substance of things, I see some people are still getting on. Don't forget to swipe up and share uh, with your friends. We'll talk about Donald Trump and what you think Salt Lake City is the new technology. No. Uh, so let me give you a quick update. I spent some time over the weekend working on a new radio deal. One of the concerns that we had with Free Capitalist Radio is the technology wasn't compatible with Periscope and the FM broadcast, meaning the quality of the Periscope attention and the quality of the FM broadcast seemed to be competing a little bit. Hey, good evening. I didn't see who that was. And I wanted to, we had by far more listeners on the FM broadcast and by far more listeners on the podcast. And so we had these small numbers on Periscope, but I really enjoyed Periscope, and I really think Periscope presents a new opportunity to connect with people and to spread ideas and this kind of thing. So I was brainstorming on whether I wanted to continue to keep the Periscope project coupled with Free Capitalist Radio. And I did some exploring. I talked to some strategic partners in terms of getting Free Capitalist Radio out. As you know, my goal is to get Free Capitalist Radio back up to a very sizable audience, this kind of thing. And what I decided to do is break the two apart. And so what I'm going to do is at 10 o'clock Mountain Standard Time at night, I'm going to do these periscopes, and we're going to do question and answers. And I'm going to start off with question and answers that have been raised on the Free Capitalist group on the Facebook page. So those of you who have been engaging in conversations there can also then hear my take on things, and we can engage here and this kind of thing. And then, hey, howdy from New Orleans. And then I'll take questions here on Periscope in a more laid-back fashion without commercial breaks, without the bumps in and out that you have to have on the radio show. Then I'm going to do the radio show separately at a different time slot earlier in the day, and then publish that immediately to the podcast. Because, see, if we just are doing the radio program, I can publish that straight to the podcast, within 10 minutes of the show being over. And what that does is that opens that up. What do I mean by the podcast? Yeah, I understand. I haven't been able to update the podcast because we've been doing the video, audio combination, and SoundCloud all at the same time. So, no, the podcast is on SoundCloud and on iTunes, and I think since the end of the first week of November, it hasn't been getting updated. That's one of the problems we're trying to address. And we've got all those archives, we've got all that content, and we absolutely will be publishing that and making that available. And the goal is to utilize technology, not kind of be held back by technology. So what this new approach is going to enable us to do is get out more content more quickly and to engage more people. And my goal, quite frankly, is also to really grow this Periscope and to really grow, the ability to interact with people, exposing them to brain-on ideas, exposing them to the basic principles of capitalism and the virtues of a liberty-based society. So with that said, I decided to turn down the opportunity to actually expand my existing radio broadcast at 10 p.m. I was going to do 2 hours. We're just getting ready to go forward with the 2-hour show and go till midnight. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to back that up and do that earlier in the day. And so if you get a chance to listen, we're going to be expanding that. We're working on a syndication deal to expand that into more markets with the FM broadcast. So that's going to be great. So, contact your favorite local talk radio station. Tell them to get in touch with us, Free Capitalist Radio. And we've got a real generous offer for stations who want to pick up Free Capitalist Radio. The advertising, interestingly enough, has been picking up quite a little bit. As some of you probably noticed, some of the campaigns bought in and this kind of thing. So it's the right season for Free Capitalist Radio to be spreading. So with that said, transitioning into today's Periscope topic, I wanted to, let's see, I don't know what is involved, but I can learn. I'd love to help catch up on putting out the podcast. Well, and I appreciate that, Jeff. And the truth is, it's real easy to put out the podcast if we're just doing the audio podcast. Putting out a video of the show creates a little bit more challenge, because if you're going to produce it at all, if you're going to add any effects, if you're going to add any editing to the video, etc., you're dealing with compression and you're dealing with uploading. An hour, even just an hour show turns into be almost a gigabyte, and so you're dealing with putting up a gigabyte of data minimum, and that's if you've got good compression and stuff. So that just slows us down. If we're just doing MP3 audio files, we get that out quickly, and then everybody's got the opportunity on multiple platforms here. Plus, with the Periscope, this gives us a real authentic way to really engage and interact as well. So I'm very excited about that. I actually have some things I'm going to be putting up on YouTube as well. We're going to be doing some topic videos on capitalist perspective on issues, 5 to 10 minute topic videos that we'll be putting up on YouTube. So all these opportunities are really coming forward. As you guys have seen, I'm really reinvesting into the brand of getting the Free Capitalist Project out there. And let me just scope it out for you. Actually, in the expansion, it's also very simple. There's kind of a 3-step or a 3-tier process here. My goal is to get the Free Capitalist message, the principles of capitalism and of liberty out to as many people as possible, expose as many people as possible to these ideas, and to create a community of people who want to be brain on, who don't like being manipulated by the media, who don't like the lies that are being told by all the major political parties, who don't like the manipulation being spread throughout the media and through the candidates, who want to live prosperous lives and who want to be part of building a free society. And that's if you just want to talk about it, that doesn't take much. There's a lot of people that just talk about it. But if you actually want to engage in changing your life, if you want to actually engage in being prosperous and advancing the cause of liberty, it's going to take work. And so I want to get that out free. I want to spread it with as few barriers as possible. So I want to keep putting it out there on Stitcher and on iTunes and on SoundCloud, and now using Periscope. We'll be using YouTube. We'll be using freecapitalist.com. And so with that kind of thing, that's kind of tier 1. And then tier 2 is to invite people as they hear us talking about current events, as they hear us talking about philosophical questions, as they hear us engaging on these issues. And by the way, Facebook's a part of this strategy, getting those conversations going, introducing people to these conversations on Facebook, and then inviting these people to invest in the 13 principles and to really start to formulate a framework or a conceptual understanding where they can start learning and cataloging their ideas instead of just being frustrated and upset, so they can both engage in the outside world and also reform their own perspective with the principles of freedom and the principles of liberty and this kind of thing. And then the third step is to expand the Free Capitalist experience. We've got our first group of people just getting ready to get started on the Free Capitalist experience, where we work with them for 1 year on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, getting free and becoming literally free capitalists. And that's the exciting thing. That's when I set out to do this years ago with Les McGuire, that was our goal, is to, ideas are great, talking's great, but the beautiful part is when it starts to change your life, and when you start to live the life that you love, and you start to really make progress, and you're not stuck, and you don't look at your life and say, geez, I'm kind of grinding away like I was grinding away a year ago or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or I look at my community and we're going the wrong direction. It's getting worse and worse. We want to change that. We want to change that one person at a time, helping individuals who are sincere and genuine and passionate and motivated to get out of that rat race, financially, philosophically, in their relationships, and how they build their homes. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, I think, towards the end of tonight's show, or tonight's Periscope. So with that said, that's kind of my announcement for the day. By way of beginning conversation, I know some of you have been chiming in on this Donald Trump news of the day. I see a lot of you commenting and sharing messages and this kind of thing on social media about Donald Trump. And so my question to kind of get us started off with, and I'll answer any question. Now, if you rapid fire them, you might have to repeat them because I might miss some of them. This goes pretty quickly, but and again, don't forget to invite your friends. If you got friends who are interested in a brain-on conversation and a brain-on, back and forth, let's get them on these podcasts. Let's get these ideas out there and let's talk about them, because that's one of the big problems. I think I started the podcast with the title, "Is there evil or is there danger in Donald Trump?" And Jewel and I, over the last 2 days, have been spending a lot of time talking about what's going on, both what Donald Trump has published and said, and what the media has published and said, and what other organizations have said. And I will tell you what, in my opinion, is the most dangerous part of this whole Trump discussion. And that is how quickly our conversation escapes rationality, and how quickly people on both sides or multiple sides of the issue rapidly escalate to name calling and ad hominems. It's an evidence of how sick, how ill our society has become, that people on both sides of the issue cannot articulate a principled response. And I saw somebody say no more than most candidates. I don't know what planet you're living on when you say that, but there's no one has illustrated this phenomenon in modern history like Donald Trump and the media surrounding him. There's been nothing comparable to it, because it's a whole different breed of show. It's a whole different social phenomenon going on. And let me give you a couple examples. So Donald Trump comes out, and I really like the fact that he actually published a written statement. And then, of course, he read it, and he's made some appearances in the media since then, this kind of thing. But, one of the things I did when I first saw all this coming out is I said, well, before I form any opinions, I don't trust the media ever at all. Most of the media is corrupt, scripted, nonsense. If you're still figuring that out, welcome to, adolescence. Intellectually, you're starting to wake up. You're not an adult yet. You got to figure out that the mainstream media is not reliable source of information. The only thing they can tell, they're like smoke. Let's say that's true, but just like every other politician, he's just another puppet. That's not true. That's not true, Alma. That's rhetoric. That's the rhetoric of failure. That's the rhetoric that says the world around me is all fake. Everything's fake. I'm the only real thing. And I understand where that comes from, because there is so much fake. But it's not fake. There's a game being played that you're not part of. There's a game being played where you're being played. You're a game piece, not a player. And so the knee-jerk reaction is to say they're all puppets. Or the knee-jerk reaction is to say it's all a conspiracy. Or the knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, it's all evil. It's just not true. And that's not rational. Because it's so much more than that. And we can talk about it. And this is my point. It's the sickness that we've gotten into in society, where we can't think as a people. And capitalists are different. People who love liberty are different. We're plowing through this. That's why the liberty movement is picking up steam, and that's why the liberty movement is maturing, okay? And that's why voices like Free Capitalist Radio are primed to really be influential in the marketplace of ideas now. Because what's happening, let me give you an example. And let me back up here. So Donald Trump says in his policy statement, hey, I think the United States should stop temporarily accepting Muslim immigrants. Now, there was some ambiguity that needed to be clarified. Did he just say Muslims, period? Did he say Muslim immigrants? Did he say Muslim refugees? What did he mean? U.S. citizens, the whole deal. But the earth-shaking part of that, the radical, if you will, part of that caused everybody to get in the uproar, is he strategically advocated dealing with a category of people defined solely by their religion. Now, there are lots of viewpoints on that issue, but there are two primary sides to that discussion. And I want to talk first about the side that says, yeah, that doesn't sound, let's see, in the end, does it really matter who the president is when the body politic? Yes, it does matter, Alma, but it doesn't matter for you. Meaning, you're part of something bigger, and if you're going to get distracted by all this as an excuse not to be doing the things in your life that enable you to be a capitalist, enable you to be part of the liberty movement, and enable you to be part of real social transformation, then it's a waste of time. Okay? But of course it matters. And the Free Capitalist Project and the American Liberty Society, the American Liberty League, and the things we're doing, our goal is to radically advance revolution. It's to radically advance social transformation. Not like the Greens, not like the progressives, not like the socialists, but more along the lines of the Founding Fathers, which is a very serious thing. And it's not easily comprehended, and quite frankly, it's not. I'm not going to take the time tonight to plot that all out for you. But let me just back up here again. Yes, it matters. Let me get back to the conversation about Donald Trump. So I want to talk first about the people who go, yeah. I mean, look, there's a problem. You know, it's not Catholic nuns who are repeatedly being found with pipe bombs and automatic weapons at some scene of carnage. It's not a bunch of Sikhs that are plotting for the last 20 years repeatedly in these high-profile situations claiming they've got an agenda against the United States. It's not a group of, Tibetan monks that historically are waging war and quote-unquote jihad against the United States. It's not a group of Mormons. It's not a group of Irish Catholics. Generally speaking, the pattern, and this is where Donald Trump is right, and this is why it resonates, and quite frankly, this is why everybody's freaked out. Because we're not used to conversation on television like conversation we have with, Joe down the street. Because if you're, I'm in my 40s, right? I'm 42 years old. And so 42 years old, I've had a lot of freaky conversations with people in my life, right? There are a lot of people that have weird views. I've had freaky conversations with famous people. I've had freaky conversations with candidates of the presidency of the United States. I've had freaky conversations with leaders of the major churches in America. Some of you know my story. I have had a lot of knee-to-knee, face-to-face conversations with a lot of people. And sometimes it is crazy, alarming when you hear some of these ideas coming from prominent people. I've had freaky conversations with sports figures, with political figures, with economic conversations. Yeah, freaky, like, holy cow, that's out of left field. So my point is, so have you, right? And so what's happening is when you got a guy who's running for the presidency of the United States and he talks like Joe down the street, it causes panic because, see, he's not measuring his words, and I'm not apologizing. I'm not defending Donald Trump here. I'm talking about the contours of this social phenomenon that's going on. And what's happened is he says, hey, well, why don't we just stop the Muslims from coming in here? Which is a real practical, pragmatic approach to say, well, yeah, it's always these fundamentalists, these Islamic fundamentalists who are doing this. And it provokes this a visceral response from both actual sides, from both his friends and his foes, and even people who up until now haven't cared, because it's so pragmatic, actually. And by pragmatic, I'm not saying good or bad. I'm saying he's actually not talking about the principles. Okay, those of you who've been listening to me for a while know the difference. He's doing cost-benefit analysis. He says, well, we ought to just start looking for these terrorists among the Muslims, which is a very rational, pragmatic approach. But it's divorced from principle, which is causing some problems, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And so there's a group of people at his rallies who are like, heck yeah, it's about time somebody's talking common sense. And see, businessmen do this. It's like his wall conversation. He says, we're going to build a big wall. It's going to be a pretty wall. Well, he's a billionaire, right? So he's not the guy that creates the blueprints. He's not. I'm not defending him. I'm creating I don't want to tilt this conversation that way. I want to talk about what's going on, because I'm surprised at how unintelligent and brain off the social conversation is about what's going on here. And what you've got is, Donald Trump's kind of broad brushing this, and he's not the president of the United States, and he's not advocating a specific law. And what happens in corporate America, in business, we all, one of the big reasons Donald Trump is popular, according to the dominant theories, he's an outsider, he's a businessman, like Ross Perot. We want somebody who knows how to run a business and get things done. And the way you get things done that are big is you paint with a broad brush, and then you put good people on a project to refine that project, implement that project, carry out that project, and you are the one who holds people accountable. And so Donald Trump's freaking people out because when he paints with a broad brush, he avoids nuance, he avoids deliberateness with his words, and he avoids speaking to the intellectual crowd that takes themselves very, very seriously, and he pisses them off because they're like, hey, you're not worshiping at the altar of our intellect. You're not talking to us. But that's the point. Donald Trump's not talking to people who want to make the nuanced distinction between Shia and Sunni Islam and Wahhabi Islam. He's not talking to people who want to make a distinction between radicalized elements of any religion, and which quote unquote can be dangerous, and radicalized elements of one religion. He's not talking to people who are saying, wait a minute, there's 1 billion Muslims in the world. They're not all terrorists. He knows that. He's not stupid. He's not talking to you if that's your response. He's talking to a group of people who are saying, why aren't we looking at the pattern and making a common sense deduction? And so he's getting a groundswell from those people, but he's really pissing off the establishment on the other side of that. So now I want to talk about the other side. A lot of my friends, both in the liberty movement and in religious circles and this kind of thing, they're really offended by Donald Trump. Really offended, like mortally offended. Matter of fact, I saw Shiloh Logan, who's I don't know him personally, but, well, that's not true. I don't have like a flesh and blood friendship relationship with him, but we've known each other online for some time. We've got a lot of common social connections. And he said the stupidest thing on Facebook he said, everybody who follows Donald Trump is an idiot. And I was like, ooh, that was a real intellectual statement. I mean, that's my point. We're so sick as a society, even when we disagree with someone and we have a sense that what they're saying is wrong, we don't know how to articulate why. And so I've listened very carefully to people who have real passionate opinions on this, because I actually have a real passionate opinion too. I might share it with you when we're done with this Periscope. I'm not going to share it with you yet. But I even asked Jewel, asked other family members, I said, what's your opinion of this? And they're like, well, tell me, what's yours? And no, I don't want to tell you what mine is. You tell me what yours is. I want to hear yours first. And it's amazing to me. People say, what's wrong? And I said, well, why is it wrong? Well, what do you mean you don't think it's wrong? Yeah. I'm willing to entertain that discussion. You haven't concluded yet? See, we're so sick as a society, we don't even care what the argument is. We just want to know what people's camps are. Are you on my side or their side? Which throws discourse and reason out the window, which is sick society, ill society. And so I have a friend who is very intelligent, been to Ivy League schools, PhD, very, very significant intellect in some circles. And I said, well, okay, let me just begin by telling you, I actually have an intellectual and moral problem with Donald Trump's statement. But before we get into that, I want you to tell me why you have a problem with it. And he said, well, it's like racism. And I haven't heard that. I was watching MSNBC right before we did this Periscope tonight, and I heard this Muslim political thought leader person on there talking about how this was racism. And I started laughing. And I said, well, do we need to go back and have a little breakdown of what the word racism means? Okay, it's not racism. It might be akin to racism. There may be an argument that it's related to racism, but it's not racism. Judging a group of people, judging a group of people by the religion that they hold to isn't racism. What is it? See, and I was talking to another very close friend, and I said, well, what is it that makes you so uncomfortable with Donald Trump says? Well, it's against our Constitution. Well, What? What did he say that's against our Constitution? Well, I mean, the government can't discriminate against religion. What? What Constitution are you reading? And I said, well, let's go get, you're talking about the First Amendment? Okay, let's go get the First Amendment. Okay, I spent like an hour and a half with this lawyer friend of mine. So well, let's look at the First Amendment here. Is Donald Trump, if he were the, see, he's not the President of the United States, but let's pretend that he were, because he's campaigning for that. If he were the President of the United States and he were advocating for this policy, is the federal government prohibited by the Constitution from implementing such a policy? And after an hour and a half, I finally could show my friend what the Constitution and the law related to the Constitution actually means in this context. But he had no clue. It doesn't matter about Donald Trump's freedom. That's not what the issue is. The question is, in the First Amendment, for most people who say, well, this is against the Constitution, even Dick Cheney said, it's against everything we are as Americans. Why? What is it that's wrong with this statement? Here's what it is. There's a problem with grouping people by religion and dictating federal government policy. Okay, but what is the problem? What are the rights at issue? What are the principles at issue? Because Donald Trump didn't say, we're going to go kill all Muslims. He didn't say, we're going to go jail all Muslims. I love also how quickly everybody said, this is like Japanese internment camps. And even Donald Trump, but I don't think he did himself any favor by hearkening back to FDR and talking about World War II. I don't think that was rhetorically very smart. But he's not advocating that. Now, some people say, well, it's a slippery slope. Okay, there's an argument. A slippery slope to what? We have to know what's wrong first so we know what we're slippery sloping into. Let's get real clear on this. You see, what is the issue? But what is the individual right? Let me ask you this question. Do men, and by men I mean gender neutral there, inclusive, I mean all men and women, does everyone on the earth have a right to come into the United States? Okay, let's start with, Danny, let's talk about inalienable rights first. Does anyone have an inalienable right, who's not in the United States, to come into the United States? You see, there's this weird presumption that somehow we're talking about the rights of men who aren't even here. Now, I'm not saying there's a different question. Is it good public policy? Should America let people in? But let's just start with the beginning. Does Bob over in Afghanistan, I'm trying to be funny, does Bob and his wife Julie and their two little children, and they want to get out of Afghanistan, do they have the right to come to America? Well, certainly they don't have an inalienable right to come here. I'd like to hear that argument if somebody has one. And you're not going to share it with me here on Periscope, so you have to post that one on Facebook. I cannot conceive of a way to explain a natural right, an inalienable right, to come into the United States of America. Now, I would argue that Bob and his wife has an inalienable right to life and liberty. Yeah, every human being, no matter where they are, have the same inalienable rights, absolutely. And then besides inalienable rights, there are positive rights that are granted by government. Okay? Now, let's, I don't want to get lost in the weeds here, and I don't want to lose you. I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm like, whoa, people are going to sleep. What is the issue here? What is the offensive thing? Well, here's what it is, and it's not in the First Amendment. See, the First Amendment says Congress, or, if you want to extrapolate what it means, not just what it says that the federal government shall make no law establishing religion or interfering with the free exercise of religion. Okay, so clearly Donald Trump, in making the statement that he wants a policy to temporarily stop non-citizen Muslims from coming into the United States. Hold on, you're asking a good question, Jeff, but it's further down the chain. Donald Trump isn't establishing religion. And now some might argue by implication he is, because what he's doing is he's establishing kind of an everybody but you religion. But that argument has never flown before the Supreme Court, and there's some rational reasons why, because it's an infinite set of people who aren't excluded, and it's a finite set of people who are excluded. So he's not establishing a religion. The question is then, is the government, if they acted on this policy, interfering with the free exercise of religion? But there you have to understand, and this starts to go into Jeff's question, whose religion? You see, the United States government only has jurisdiction over the land it claims, okay, and the citizens who it claims. So, the United States government is bound by the First Amendment not to infringe on the free exercise of religion of American citizens. Yes, Denny, you're starting to get to the point. So the First Amendment doesn't get us there. The First Amendment doesn't get us there. But the First Amendment, the right in the First Amendment about the free exercise of religion is based on an inalienable right. And we've been talking about that. The inalienable right of conscience. See, the freedom of religion relates to the inalienable liberty of conscience. We've been talking about that, right? And a man is free to think by right. Inalienable. Liberty of conscience. And because all men everywhere are free by nature to think, Americans decided to build our government in such a way that we prohibit our government from exercising its powers solely based on the ideas that its subjects, citizens, hold. That's why in America we allow the Ku Klux Klan to exist. I'm just using that as one example. A lot of people in the world think that's crazy. A lot of people in the world think we ought to go round up the Ku Klux Klan. A lot of people in America think we ought to go round up hate groups and put them in jail. But what makes America America is we say you can think, you can hold any idea you want to hold. And religion is part of that. Your creed, your belief, your professed faith. That's an extension of your liberty of conscience. Yes, no one has a right not to be offended. There is no such thing as a right not to be offended. There's no such thing as a right not to be alarmed or provoked. I have to put an asterisk there because it's certain types of alarm and certain types of provocation, like force. If somebody's provoking you with the threat of force, that's a whole different story. You know, if I say to you, I hate this category of human beings. I hate women. I hate Scandinavians. I hate whatever. The United States is built on the idea that because the liberty of conscience is an inalienable right, the government doesn't have any moral authority and therefore justification to use force against a man because of the idea. So, because of that, in America, any America who has had an education in civics related to Islam, because a huge majority of the billion-plus Muslims in the world are not white, understand that. But you know, you can be white and a Muslim. You can be anything and a Muslim, racially, that is. And so what the issue here is when you single out a group of people and you categorize them by their ideas, and then you say we're going to use force against a group of people because of their ideas. because of the ideas that they profess, not the ideas that they're acting upon. And not only that, Donald Trump is saying not only because there's a big disagreement about what ideas Muslims really hold. And Donald Trump justified his position by saying, well, here's a Pew Research poll, here's another Center for Some Studies poll, and here's how Muslims think. Therefore, we should treat these people as a whole differently. Well, here's my challenge with all that. People who want to defend liberty and want to point out why that's a bad idea, they ought to be able to explain why it's a bad idea. And not just say it's immoral, it's Hitler, it's concentration camps, it's racism, it's internment camps. Because those are all not true. Those are all sensational, fear-based, fear of loss, irrational invitations to conclude without thinking. What people say is they're trying to shame others who don't agree with them. And it is a politics of shame. If you don't agree with me, shame on you. If you agree with Donald Trump, shame on you. And what Donald Trump, the real danger here that I see with Donald Trump's candidacy is the weakness of the political establishment. The weakness of the media establishment, who cannot articulate a rational, well-thought-out explanation as to what's wrong with what Donald Trump is advocating, without resorting to rhetorical tropes and mismatched metaphors. Because going back to the first, there's a group of people who are saying, but there's something true about what he's saying. I'm not a racist, I'm not anti-Muslim, but dang it, it's always these Muslims who are blowing people up. Okay, there's that view. And so what's happening is, there's like two ships passing in the night, and interestingly enough, it's the intellectuals this time who are on the dangerous ship. Because it is very, very dangerous, my friends. Think about this. Out of the almost dozen Republican presidential candidates, 9 of them came out with soundbite statements against this policy by Donald Trump. Not one of them offered an explanation as to what was morally wrong with his statement. It was all presumed. And that shows how weak as a country we are. We're electing leaders based on their presumption, their moral presumptions. We're getting upset and angered over political policies based on presumptions. And so even if you're right, you're wrong. Because just because you happen to get on the right side of an issue sentimentally, you don't have your feet on the ground. You don't have an intellectual basis, so you're blown about by every wind of doctrine. See, the problem I have with Donald Trump is, with his statement on this is using federal force as a policy against a group of people based on how they think is, by itself, intellectually a bad idea. It's not necessarily immoral yet, because what he's saying he wants to deprive them of, they don't have a right to anyway. And you notice Rupert Murdoch came out, and I'm no big fan of Rupert Murdoch either, but you notice Rupert Murdoch came out and said, yeah, I kind of agree with Donald Trump, but I would say it this way. He says, I think we should just put a moratorium on all immigration or all refugees, on all income into the United States until we get better at screening. Now, see, Rupert Murdoch doesn't trip over that intellectual red flag because he's not grouping any one category of human being based on their ideas. He's being fair across the board, whether you agree with him or not. So nobody's going to be too up in arms about what Rupert Murdoch is saying. But if you actually drill down to what Donald Trump is saying, and I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. When you drill down to what he's saying, he's going to argue, well, this isn't really a distinction. Ted Cruz comes out and says, well, and Rand Paul comes out and says, well, we have to stop immigration from the parts of the world where there's a high, population of ISIS. And it has to do with articulation and how you advocate. And this goes back to what I've been saying, and you guys can go back to the very first Republican debate when I did a show on Free Catalyst Radio, and I said about Donald Trump, I said, I like that he's mixing it up. I like that he is giving the establishment hell. And I like the fact that he's bringing attention to the right issues. By the way, notice that everybody's now talking about what should be done besides gun control. Notice that the gun control debate, which was the heated debate right after this California tragedy, it's not even barely registering on the radar the last 2 days, and everybody's talking about how Donald Trump's a bad idea, and here's a better one. And so what's going to happen, you watch, in a week or two, if he survives this, if he doesn't cave in, if he doesn't panic, and I got no dog in this fight, but here's my prediction of what's going to happen. If Donald Trump continues to get the kind of support he's getting, you're going to see him say, hey, look, I started the conversation. Now everybody's having this conversation. And he's going to refine his position a little bit to back away from the idea of using government force. Yes, I understand. And you remember, Denny, when the House passed the resolution about better vetting, at that point in time, that was considered fringe. That was considered way out there. Now that Donald Trump has spoken, that's like the position everybody's retreating to. And I will tell you, I do not like Eric Erickson of Red State. I do not like this person very much at all. I'm not impressed with him, but you have to give credit where credit's due. He actually said something really funny. He said, this is brilliant politics by Donald Trump, if you read The Art of the Deal. It's like when you come into a negotiation and you're on a piece of property and you're willing to sell the property for $300,000, and you come in and say $1 million. And the other side's like, holy crap, you're crazy. And they come in and say $500,000, and you say, okay, deal. Well, you're already $200,000 now above where you were willing to go. And that's what actually happened on this political issue. Donald Trump went so far out on the edge, as far as most people are concerned, that what the House did now is like a safe thing. And you watch, there's going to be people who start to say, yeah, that's a good compromise. That's a good compromise. And what's ironic about this is that's actually leadership. Again, I don't agree with Donald Trump's race baiting when he does that. And I don't agree with his kind of nativism. And I don't agree with his treatment. See, I told you, going back to what I said about Donald Trump, I said I like all these things, but here's the problem with Donald Trump. He doesn't have a comprehensive philosophy. He doesn't have a firm, principled platform. This is the problem with the politicians in America today, both the Republicans and the Democrats. Their platforms are based primarily on issues, not on principles. And so the ideological causes that are in their fringes have more power than the parties do, because the parties can't seem to ever get their feet under them, because they don't stand for anything. They stand for weird concepts like smaller government, but that's not a principle. It's just a measurement. And I mean, smaller tyranny is still tyranny. Yeah, I mean, arguably smaller tyranny is better, but in the age of nuclear weapons and the internet, I don't know what small even means anymore. And so you have to stand for principled government. And so what you've got here is you've got a person in the position of Donald Trump, and he's dangerous because he has sentiment and he has issues and he has personality, but he's not attached to principles. And Americans don't reward people who are attached to principles because Americans aren't attached to principles. So if you want to change the world, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to learn how to attach yourself to principles. And then you've got to get good at looking out into the world and seeing others who are attached to principles and building relationships with them. That will lead to prosperity. That will lead to all of the good things we often talk about in your life. And in politics, if you want to see a better politics, if you want to see a better, more just campaign for president of the United States, there's got to be a rising up, a revolution based on principle, where people can actually tell the difference between rhetoric and hyperbole and principled explanation of policies. Here's another example. There's a 14-minute talk by Benjamin Netanyahu. And I know some of you have one feeling or the other about him. That's fine. But there's a 14-minute video that he did after this California tragedy. And for 14 minutes, he talks without a teleprompter, unscripted, about his view of the story, if you will, of what the real conflict is in the Middle East. And it's incredible to see a person dispassionately, and let me rephrase that, to see a person very level-headed, firm conviction, advocating his view and his policies and his ideas. America is sorely in need of leaders who advocate from a base of principle. And we're going to get them one way or the other. So there's two paths to this. The one path is the one we're on. You elect Barack Obama, who has no principles. He has sentiment, and he has ideas related to agendas and issues. He is aligned with the socialist principles, but he doesn't actually even espouse them, interestingly enough, and he contradicts them sometimes. And so what happens is, but he's this very powerful cult of personality. He was a response to George Bush, who abandoned his principles. I like George Bush much better than I liked Barack Obama, but they both were void of principles. And so now we have Donald Trump, and it's spiraling. What you're having is you're having a crisis. You're having an explosion in the marketplace of ideas. You're having a breakdown or a failure of the intellectual framework that was America. Because the average person doesn't know how to explain what's going on. We've now got to the point where the professional class, the intellectual class, the journalism class, the political class, they cannot offer simple, rational explanations for what's going on. Look, here's another simple example. There's a debate about why the Democrats won't say radical Islamic terrorist. Well, that's all a red herring. And while I'm sympathetic to people who are concerned about that, the average American, okay, and here's a test for you. Without Googling, I'm going to give you a test, my friends. You guys are brain-on, capitalist-minded, liberty-loving people, or you have brain-on, capitalist-minded, liberty-loving friends who got you here. Wait, let me just give you a test real quick. I'm going to show you why that's a red herring, why that's a stupid argument. I'm going to ask you about the religion called Islam for a minute. Without Googling, name the 3 predominant sects or divisions of Islam worldwide. Without Googling. Okay. Question number 2. Again, without Googling. Where is the geographic consolidation of the minority 2 segments of Islam? Okay, Denny, you're giving away answers, and you got 2 out of 3. Why is Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran relevant to the geographic minority in Islam? Okay. Question 3. Am I on 3 or 4? No. No. Sorry. Denny says ISIL, but sorry, man. I'm laughing because I just had this conversation with Jewel earlier on a different topic, but the same concept. ISIL, or the Islamic State, or the Al-Nusra Front, or Al-Qaeda, or any other name for these groups that are competing for power in the vacuum, in the geopolitical vacuum in that area. The outgrowth of that is the problem. But the significance, what's causing that? What's causing that? And it's not poverty. It's not hopelessness. It's not global warming. Yeah, it's not. It's actually interesting. There is something to be said about a certain view inside Islam that wants that geographical area, but there's a reason for that. See, that's still a symptom. That's still a symptom. So here's my question for you. If the average American doesn't yet have a basic understanding of these concepts without Googling, why are we wading into the weeds about linguistic constructs? And everybody, it's so funny. It's so funny. People wonder why Barack Obama uses the term ISIL instead of ISIS. And why France is now not using either one of those terms, but is using Daesh and this kind of thing. We're all worried about what we should call these people, because we don't know what the hell to do about them. So we're spending all our time and resources debating about what we should call them. Let me just tell you, a leader says we call them what I call them. Okay, remember the baseball umpires? Remember the 3 baseball umpires? The first one says, I call them like I see them. The other one says, I call them like they really are. And the third umpire says, they aren't nothing till I call them. A leader defines the enemy. We're living at a time where the enemy is defining us and dividing us. So, when Barack Obama gave his speech, it was so condescending and so parochial. I thought to myself, what we need from a president is a president who defines the issue and who leads on the issue. And sadly, Donald Trump is the only one trying to do that. Jeb Bush is too busy trying to define Donald Trump. Rand Paul is still trying to insist that he isn't being properly defined. Rick Perry is out of the equation. He had some interesting public policy ideas on the Middle East. The New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, he's still trying to say I'm relevant, and I loved his response. It got all kinds of brain-off accolades. He says, well, this is the kind of thing people say who don't have experience. Okay, well, what is it that you have to say, Mr. Experience? You see, my friends, we're in deep trouble. No, not lead on the issue, define the issue. That's where principles matter. When you define how you're going to approach an issue, you point to governing principles. The President of the United States at Thanksgiving said that what made America unique, the genius of America, is that we believe in accepting everyone. No, that's not what makes America unique. That may be a historical artifact or consequence of what liberty means, because all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that once you recognize that, you want people to come to your country. It's a good thing that people want to be in your country. People are assets. It is good for the United States of America when people from around the globe want to be here. But leading on an issue, you define the issue and reference your principles upon which you're acting. That's leadership. Now, Donald Trump, sadly, in my opinion, okay, I'll give you now a little bit of my opinion of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the equivalent of a 15-year-old who's just figured out he can actually take the keys to the car, and mom and dad can't really stop him unless they're willing to call the police. And there's nobody else willing to engage at the level that Donald Trump's engaging. He has no competition. They're just trying to swat him down. He is at least, he's advocating principle, by the way. One of the principles he says is, a nation without borders is not a nation. Well, there's a principle there, because Jeff asked this question earlier. Jeff said, who has the moral authority or the moral right to refuse others to come into their country? Whoa! That's a brilliant question, Jeff. It's a brilliant question. Socialists can never answer the question, by the way, because it creates a philosophical contradiction for them. But capitalists can answer the question because of the notion of private property. But Jefferson gives us the best beginning point. If you go to the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. So the men who consent to the government that they institute, okay, do that over a certain geographical area. They institute a government. Sometimes they have to war to claim it, and there's a whole different discussion. And I understand your Lysander Spooner arguments. I'm happy to have a Lysander Spooner conversation here. But generally speaking, if we just start with John Locke, when a government exists, it exists over a geographical space. And the people in that geographical space that assent to that government, okay, who don't leave, okay, and there's an asterisk when you talk about, well, if they're not able to leave, that's a different discussion. Those people form a nation. And those people have the right to protect their nation. That's a right that's referenced in the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the freedom to assemble. That includes the freedom to assemble representatives, to create governmental assemblies. And just like you have a right to say, this is my property, I don't want you here. Now, you might be a jerk, you might be unwise, you might be immoral, but there are certain fundamental rights that you have. And as a nation, Donald Trump is right when he appeals to the right of a nation to control its borders. The problem is his rhetoric is so unprincipled that the principle he's advocating is kind of a subconscious call to arms in this dangerous cult of personality. So, seriously, the front runner for the Republican Party is intellectually the equivalent of a 15-year-old. But he's the most grown up among them, by the way. Because the rest of them think it's grown up to talk grown up. We have a group of impotent adolescents competing for the intellectual mindshare of people in America and of people across the world. And they think that sophistication and civility is talking right. And they get really mad when people talk wrong about guns, about immigrants, about borders, about the economy, about education. If you don't talk right, you lose. That's a sign of anti-intellectualism. That's a sign of a lack of ideas. No one has a right to crash a party he's not invited to, unless it's at his house. So the real danger, my friend, in Donald Trump is that nobody is stepping up to compete with him. Freedom of association is different from freedom to assemble, but both come from the same. Then, again, that's a distinction without a difference for the purpose of this conversation. The point that I'm making is the real danger that's going on in our country right now. Donald Trump is exposing the impotence of the political class, of the business class, of the media class, of the ruling class. He's exposing the impotence. And the danger is that as the public, as the citizens, we are anxious to dive into the brawl with rhetoric and mean-spirited shaming rather than the teaching of principles and reliance on principles. And that is way more dangerous than if Donald Trump were to get elected president of the United States. Because if Donald Trump were to get elected president of the United States, we still have a court system and a legislative body that act, okay, to check his power. And listen, our system's broken, But what's much worse than that system is mob rule, particularly mob rule based on shame. Now, I posted a quotation from my church leaders today because I agree with it. One of my heroes in religion and politics is Joseph Smith, and I know for a lot of people that rubs them wrong, but frankly, they just haven't studied Joseph Smith's politics very much if they don't understand what I'm saying. And there was a quote from the LDS Church today that said, "We don't get involved in political issues, but we do speak out for religious liberty, and our position is the same as it was in 1830s and 1840s." Here are two quotes from Joseph Smith, who said, in essence, "I will lay down my life in the defense of any man whose rights are being violated. Because if a government grows strong enough to violate his rights, it's strong enough to violate mine." And then one even talked specifically about different denominations of faith, including Muslims. The problem, my friends, is not the discussion of whether we should allow Muslims into America. The problem is if there are enough of us who are willing to start working together to change the nature of the conversation. And I, for one, know how quickly and how powerfully we can do that. In a very short period of time, a group of liberty-loving people could become the most politically significant influence in this country. Those of you who have worked with me in the Free Capitalist Project for some time tasted it a few years back. Now, it requires some determination and some real effort to do it. But the solution is to quit getting so worked up in your fears that you abandon reason and principle. And when you see things like what happened with Donald Trump, this is what I encourage my friends to do. Sit down and ask yourself, what's wrong with this? What's right with this? What are the principles involved? What is my position? Clearly, now here's the rest of my position. Clearly it's rational. Clearly it's rational to say, hey, whether or not the majority of the Muslims in the world condone terrorism or violence, there is a segment within the jihadist branches of Islam that is a threat. And there's a relationship to that threat in the Middle East. And it's rational to begin a conversation about that fact and that correlation. It's also rational to be worried about people coming into the United States. And again, it wouldn't be rational to spend the same amount of time and energy. The same rhetoric against Trump is the same rhetoric against Mormons, for instance. Kind of. Again, Trump could have done better in his articulation. I have trouble, supporting any candidate who doesn't have a consistent philosophy. That's why I think candidates like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are better. These personality candidates like Ben Carson and Donald Trump, who are kind of polar opposites, but they both have some of the same appeal. Their personalities bring something to the table. They're unpredictable. Ben Carson seems to me to be a learner. He seems to be developing his political philosophy. Probably a little late to be doing that in candidacy for the United States, for the presidency of the United States, but he seems to be a little bit more of a learner. They say Donald Trump's a hater. Well, and they're going to say he's a hater no matter what. He just gave him some fodder. It may not matter. If he doesn't give up ground on this, it's not going to matter. If he doesn't get shamed into changing his position, it's not going to matter. Elections are one like beauty pageants because the state of our citizenry is like the judges of beauty pageants. But we can change the state of our citizenry. All right, I'm done preaching. Thoughts, questions, keep them coming. I see it's 11 o'clock. We won't go too much longer, but comments, ideas, thoughts, questions. Danny, why do you bring up Warren Harding? If it was a beauty pageant, I would clearly be the President of the United States. Socialists are everywhere. Socialism is the philosophy of the world. No, I haven't read Blink. You guys, America is at a hard time right now. That's great for people who want to advocate the philosophy of liberty and a movement for liberty. The opportunity for us is ripe, unlike it has ever been. 8 years of Barack Obama, who's the most socialistic president we've had since FDR, even much more than Lyndon Johnson, who was very socialistic. Very radical. Barack Obama was almost a communist. It's good in the sense that our success today in building a movement to advance the moral cause of capitalism and free society, there are more people willing to hear our message and more people willing to look around and say, yeah, I see a lot of brain off nonsense going on. There's more of that than ever before. If we're willing to do the work, my friends, we have got an awesome opportunity. That's why I'm back. That's why I'm doing this. Because with you and me, with this group of people that are participating right now, we can spread this like wildfire. Because reason and truth will prevail. Time is on the side of truth. Do you believe that, my friends? Do you believe that time is on the side of truth? Because if you believe that, it is time for you to get on the side of truth and helping us advance this cause. Now, I got to tell you, tomorrow I want to talk about a video. I'm going to try to post a video from a friend of mine about being passionate in your own advocacy, being passionate in what you do. And he's a Marxist, a socialist, and probably not opposed to communism. There's no difference between Marxism and communism. What possible difference is there between Marxism and communism, John? Frank was a communist. And Frank was his mentor. Look, Marxism is just a defense of socialism through kind of a no-limited, including a violent approach. What Islamic fundamentalism is an extension of Marxism. You got to read a little bit to understand that, but they're willing to use violence to bring about the revolution of the state control of resources. It's just a religious version of Marxism. All right, my friends, it's 11 o'clock, 11:07. I'm going to call it a night. I wish you all the best. Warm regards from Salt Lake City. Take care.